Hi, my name is Steve Ehrmann. I'm the Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning at George Washington University. And in this narration, I'm recreating a featured address I gave at the International Conference on College Teaching and Learning last week in Ponte Vedra Beach near Jacksonville, Florida. There are three interlinked topics that I'm going to address. Helping students learn to apply what they're being taught. So I mean really, truly, deeply understanding things in a way that's going to last and allow them to use what they've learned both in later courses and ultimately outside college. That's going to require, among other things, encouraging and to some degree compelling students to study in a more engaged way, a lot more and a lot better than they do now. And in order to engage those two questions, I'm going to take a fresh look at what recently has been called flipping a course, although these are ideas that go back actually quite a long time. So let's start with the difficulties, which I think are probably well known to just about everybody listening to this talk, of teaching students so that they really understand. A while back, two courses were taught in introductory composition, one totally online, the other one in a traditional campus setting. At the beginning of the semester, students in each section were assigned to write a composition. At the end of the semester, another composition on a comparable topic. So 4 stacks of compositions, 2 pre, 2 post, 2 from the campus section, 2 from the online section. They were given code numbers so they could be identified later, then mixed up into a stack, graded by an outsider, and resorted. And the question is, what was learned by looking at the average grade in each of the 4 stacks? The question that the investigator had in mind was, do students learn less, as much, or more about writing well online as they do on campus? The result, which I think wouldn't have been surprising if the expert was an expert in assessing composition, was that there was no difference in the average grade for the 4 stacks. In other words, students didn't write appreciably better after only one term of instruction, either on campus or in the online course. Learning how to write, to really communicate fluently about academic content, it's a pretty sophisticated skill. College, in a way, is about developing a number of overlapping, sophisticated capabilities of thinking. In the book Academically Adrift, came out a few years ago, Ehrmann reported on research indicating that if you look at critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing in colleges and universities across the United States, you don't really see appreciable gains from freshman year to senior year, which is even worse than obviously not seeing an appreciable gain in only a single course. Now, it's tough to understand difficult ideas, to master difficult skills. And I'll give you an example of something where I certainly failed to do that. Imagine yourself standing in front of a mirror, the kind you might see in a bathroom, so you can see yourself only from the waist up. Imagine you can just see the top of your belt all the way to the top of your head. You're standing only a few feet away from the mirror, but now you start backing away, 10 feet away, maybe 15 or 20 feet away. Do you still see yourself only from the belt up? Are you beginning to see your legs? If you back far enough away, can you see your feet? Or as you back farther and farther away, do you see less and less of your body until only your face is visible, and then you can't see your body at all? Whatever your answer is, can you explain why your reflection acts that way? I saw this, by the way, demonstrated and discussed in a wonderful series of videos available at www.learner.org called Minds of Our Own. I answered that question incorrectly. I picked B. If you try it in front of a mirror, you'll see what the answer is. But the point here is that when I was in high school, I learned the scientific law that should have enabled me to describe how my reflection would appear in a mirror, even if I've never seen a mirror. And I can still repeat the law: the angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. But I didn't see its implications at the time for mirrors, and I and I didn't at the time I was first asked this question. So formal learning didn't work for me. And I'm 65 at this point. I've moved around in front of mirrors tens of thousands of times in my life. So I've had plenty of what a faculty member might call hands-on experience with mirrors. But I still didn't understand, couldn't predict what would happen to my reflection moving back and forth in front of a mirror. So formal reflection, formal instruction and hands-on experience, at least separated, weren't enough. I don't think that means it's impossible. It just means that this kind of conceptual, abstract, here's the law, remember it, use it to solve these problems, on the one hand, and the hands-on real-world experience of moving around in front of mirrors, separate from that, were not enough to help me understand what happens to my reflection in front of a mirror. So, developing a capability, something as sophisticated as critical thinking, writing, engineering, design, legal reasoning, really appreciating the structure of a novel. These things are tough. It's even tougher when the students don't study enough hours, and it's tougher yet if they happen to forget a lot of what they were taught in one course before they ever got to another. I think we all know those things happen. Why? You may want a little documentation on that statement about studying. This also from Ehrmann Rox's book. These days, quote, full-time, close quote, students spend about 27 hours a week nationally on all their college work. So of that 27 hours, about 12 or 13 are spent studying. Now in 1960, the hours spent studying was about twice that much. So 1960, being a full-time student was closer to the 40 hours a week we usually associate with the words full-time. How many full-time college students study more than 20 hours a week? Well, in 1961, about 2/3 of them studied more than 20 hours. In today, about 20% do. Now, as I say, these issues go back a long way. Socrates, 500 BC, was worried about this. He was a first known critic, I think, of an educational technology, the technology of reading, arguing that if somebody learned something just by reading it, no one would ever know whether they really understood or whether they were just sort of repeating back what they read. They would sound like an educated person. They would think they were an educated person themselves. Maybe the author of the words would think they were an educated person, but there's no particular guarantee that they actually deeply understood it. And he just sort of left it at that. I think his image of the role of books in education was something like what somebody a couple of decades ago would have thought about correspondence education. Pretty inferior article. You could imagine Plato as the inventor of distance learning. You know, take this book, go away, read it, but then come back and we'll talk about it. We'll have that searching dialogue. Maybe we should have called that blended instruction. But there were problems, I would imagine. He would have expected students to come back having really deeply thought about and mastered the readings of what Socrates had said. And he might have had some plans for how to talk with them once they came back with this deep understanding from the reading. But a few of the students came back and said they really hadn't had a chance to do the reading, or they'd skimmed it, or they asked a friend what it was all about. And could Plato explain the reading before getting started on those deep searching interactive activities in the class? Well, that cut a little bit into the time for the dialogue. Worse, in between that time and the next time they met, some of the students, instead of spending the long, hard hours reading, would think, well, I actually did pretty well. I could have done well enough if I didn't spend so much time in the reading, just went and listened to what he had to say about what it was all about. So even more of the students came to class, came to the meeting in the Grove of Academ unprepared. Well, that was 2,500 years ago. What's happened since? I'm not going to read this aloud to you. I'll just pause a moment so you can take a look at this wonderful quote. I love that phrase. I think it's an important one. It saves me a lot of time. So there's some barriers to really improving courses so that students learn in ways that enable them to apply it and that last and are meaningful. Many courses are, we have to admit, oriented towards introducing content, covering content. And perhaps partly as a result of that style of instruction, for other reasons too, average full-time students study only about half as much time as faculty think they should. They tend to study by memorizing facts and procedures. They judge their progress by grades. So rather than assuring themselves that they understand something by applying what they've just learned to this and that and seeing if it's solid, seeing if it's consistent with other things they think they know, they wait to see what the grade is. That tells them whether they've learned. They can check that off. And in fact, if you think about learning this way, that student who was talking in the last slide was making a lot of sense. If your goal is to get a certain number of credits and you're essentially spending a certain amount of your time to get them, the less time you can put in to get the same number of credits, that's efficient. That's productive. So these things actually kind of fit together. Let's be efficient by studying, by spending as little time on it as possible, getting whatever help we need so that we can get to the grade level and number of credits we think we need. So some people have started talking about what they call flipping courses. And although the folks who've thought most about this wouldn't say so, I think a lot of people who are kind of talking casually about it have the notion that what flipping courses means is you record the lectures, perhaps in video, put them online, assign students to watch them as homework, and then use the class time for some sort of active learning. There's a problem with that. That definition lacks any strategy for increasing the student's engagement in doing the studying. It doesn't say particularly why that would help students develop understanding the capabilities that really last, and it doesn't do anything to motivate faculty to do that. That's a lot of work involved with putting together those videos. What have you tried? I will not wait for an answer, but if you want to pause and think about this before I go ahead, what have you or your colleagues tried to get students to study in a more engaged way, more energetic way, spending more hours at it, but doing that in a way and having classwork also that combine to produce capabilities that really last and the ability to really understand what it is that they've been taught. There are at least 4 angles from which this problem can be tackled. Changes in the formal academic program, changes in other elements of college life, admit different kinds of students, and if you could, somehow reach out to change that larger world, which certainly has some impact on how students think and study and conceive of college, as consumers, for example. Today, I'm just going to talk about that formal academic side of things. How can we change the design of courses and academic programs and teaching in a way that are more likely to develop real understanding and lasting capability? And as a necessary element to that, ingredient for that, encourage students to invest enough time and energy in their work outside the classroom. I don't think anything I'm about to say is original, by the way. I'm just trying to pull together things that I've read, heard, seen faculty do in a way that I don't know, is, I hope, a little elegant. To summarize the strategy, you want to try to organize assignments and classroom work around what students ought to be able to do in the future. Communicate their thoughts well, for example, think critically about a problem of politics or sustainability or how to create an amazing painting, how to analyze a problem that presents itself, a sick person who's come to you. A lot of different kinds of things we want students to be able to do. We need to be able to somehow, in order to accomplish that, to spur students to study sufficiently for understanding. And essentially, an essential element is faculty and the students. Neither one of them is going to get this right the first time. The teaching won't be organized in quite the right way the first time. The students, when they initially begin studying, it's going to be a different way of studying. They're not going to get it right. So there needs to be some way for people to learn what's not working, and to gradually correct it. Here again, that simplistic view of flipping. And again, the problem. There's no reason to believe that students will learn any more or study any harder in a flip course, defined as we just did, than they did before. And if they aren't learning enough from the homework, then that planned active learning is not going to work out, no more than it did for Plato. Don't try this alone. In my experience, one of the problems that faculty have had for decades when trying to do one aspect or another of the strategy that I'm about to outline is that students will say, nobody else is making me do this, and they'll really think they're being mistreated by the instructor who does this. Now, if there are 2 or 3 of their faculty who are all doing something similar, then it seems normal. Also, I alluded to that research early on about the students whose writing didn't improve over the course of a semester. It really is possible to improve students' writing over several semesters and over the course of a college degree. That's been shown. But for the really important capabilities, if it often can't be seen developing in one course, then faculty had better collaborate. Because together, watching students progress from one course to the next, from one year to the next, they can see a lot more about whether students are learning, where they're not learning, what's working in terms of an instructional approach, what isn't working as well, than they can just looking at things as individual instructors. So that kind of collaboration is important for that reason as well. Now, what I'm going to describe very fast is kind of a multi-pronged strategy, and I'm going to talk about it in a way that kind of makes logical sense to me, but it's important to point out you don't need to do things in this order. An individual faculty member, in fact, may already be doing some of these things and may choose to do 1 or 2 others, and then another one, and then another one, in various kinds of orders. I think the more you do, it seems likely that they'll begin to reinforce each other, each one a little bit easier to some degree because the others are being done successfully. But we'll start with that first one, redesigning the program and the course.